In light of two recent events over the last several days, there is something that I really, really want to talk about with y'all. It is a concept that we all have got to learn and practice and be able to employ when it is necessary. So if my memory serves me right, it was February 24th. Just a few. Time is not real, y'all. Things are happening simultaneously at an incredibly rapid pace, and also it seems that this year is going to drag on forever. So it was just on the 24th. Many things have happened since, but you may remember that Dr. Teresa Boren-Paul was dragged, forcibly bodily removed by private security from a Coeur d'Alene, Idaho town hall. She was initially charged because she had allegedly bitten one of the men who was assaulting her. Those charges were later dropped, and the private security firm, I believe, had their license canceled. And I made a video about it, and many other creators did too, asking, how is it that so many people stood quietly by? Apparently one man did stand up and try to stop what was happening, but basically everybody else was horrified and just let this woman get dragged out as she's screaming, and she's begging for these men to identify themselves because they're just random bros assaulting her. They were not law enforcement. And the sheriff is standing by and letting it happen. And myself and so many other folks were like, why didn't people stand up, right? I was saying, why didn't everybody stand up and fill the aisles and physically block these 2 or 3 men from harming this woman and dragging her out for simply speaking out and exercising her right to contribute to this town hall? Then earlier this week, we had Representative Al Green, who was removed by the Sergeant at Arms during Trump's speech. But Green is an American hero. Green stood up for his people. He said he understood the consequences. But the reaction from so many Americans was, why did every Democrat in that room sit by and let that happen? Sit by and let him get removed? Why did they not stand up in solidarity with him and walk out? Why is it that everybody sat there and let that happen to that man? You see the similarities here. We have one person who is targeted for speaking out and is removed while the rest of the crowd sits there and just watches. That is what is called the bystander effect. And I want us to understand what it means and how we can circumvent it, how we can overcome it. I learned about the bystander effect quite a while ago when one of my kids and I were studying social justice movements together. We were studying what has unfortunately become the classic example of the bystander effect, which was when in 1964, a young woman named Kitty Genovese was murdered in Queens, New York, while several of her neighbors basically stood by and looked on. Nobody intervened. She was screaming for help and nobody did anything. I'm going to be referencing a website called simplypsychology.org. It's one that my kid and I used when we were learning about this initially, #GoUnschooling. And I will have the link to this and a few other resources in the video description if you are watching this on YouTube later. The bystander effect is a social psychological phenomenon where individuals are less likely to help a victim when others are present. The greater the number of bystanders, the less likely any one of them is to help. Compacting factors are the diffusion of responsibility, like, oh, the more of you there are, they're like, well, somebody else is going to step in. If it's just you there, it's like, I have to do something. It's up to, there's nobody else here. It's up to me. The second compounding factor is etiquette, is social norms. It is the need to behave in correct and socially acceptable ways when we're in a crowd. Remember all those videos I made about how politeness is a tool of white supremacy and the patriarchy? Social etiquette, social norms, they are there to control us. They are there to subvert our individual will and to keep us passive and compliant. If you'd like to learn more about that, I have a whole playlist on TikTok called Feminine Dialect that talks about this issue in depth. So myself and others, we can smugly say from the comfort of our home where we are sitting by ourselves, like, oh my gosh, if I had been there, I would have stood up and done something. But this psychological phenomenon is real, and we have to understand how it impacts us in order to get around it. So it's very easy for those of us who are sitting in the comfort of our own homes by ourselves to smugly pass judgment on folks who sat there and let both of these events unfold. But we've got to understand that this psychological phenomenon is real and it impacts us. And if we don't learn how to get around it, then we may very well find ourselves in a similar situation, especially in today's America where individuals are being targeted, folks are being punished for breaking etiquette, for standing up for what's right, for not going along with the flow, for not complying and obeying in advance. More and more, we're going to see folks targeted by private security firms, by law enforcement, by right-wing officials for standing up for their rights, and we cannot let them do it alone. We are in community with each other, and as I've said so many times, we, the American people, our power, our ability to defend our democracy, our ability to fight back against fascism comes from our collective power, right? It comes from our unity and the ways that we work together to protect each other. So there's this model crafted back in 1970 called the decision model of helping, which helps explain why bystanders in emergencies sometimes do and sometimes don't intervene. There's 5 stages in this model, and for each of them where you answer yes, you move closer and closer to helping, and for each one you answer no, you move closer and closer into being a frozen bystander who does nothing. The 5 stages are: the bystander must notice that something is amiss, the bystander must define the situation as an emergency, the bystander must assess how personally responsible they feel, the bystander must decide how best to offer assistance, and then the bystander must decide to act on that decision. I want to offer one piece of encouragement here. Just learning what the bystander effect is and learning about the decision model of helping, just knowing those concepts makes you more likely to intervene and not sit quietly by while active harm is done. I want to reference another article Hal and I used. It's from Popular Science back in 2021. It's called How to Break Free of the Bystander Effect and Help Someone in Trouble by Tyler Santora. Critically, individuals feel less responsible for intervening when other people are around. They assume someone else will handle it. That's that diffusion of responsibility I was talking about earlier. Similarly, if an onlooker sees that nobody else is stepping in to help in a time of need, they may begin to assume it's because the person in trouble doesn't actually need any help. Like they start to gaslight themselves a little bit. Maybe this isn't a real emergency. Maybe I'm going to embarrass myself if I step in and it turns out not to be as big of a deal as I thought. People feel uncomfortable stepping forward in the presence of others and potentially making a mistake. We don't like to be embarrassed. We don't like to be the center of attention in public and do the wrong thing. The example given here is the misstep of trying to intervene in what you thought was a kidnapping, but it was actually just a kid throwing a tantrum and their parent was trying to calm them down. The embarrassment in that situation for over-assessing is pretty strong, and there's a lot of social pressure then to not intervene. Additionally, they may feel that the perpetrator in that situation will turn on them and attack them. That is very real in today's United States of America. They are afraid of being the next one targeted. They are afraid that the violence will extend to them if they step in. So 2 things the article goes on to talk about is that you can't let your risk of being embarrassed weigh more heavily on the risk that someone is going to be harmed or killed in front of you. Remember how I talk a lot about the right to comfort and how we as white people especially don't like to feel uncomfortable feelings like embarrassment? Yeah, we've got to work to overcome that, y'all. There's so many reasons we've got to work to overcome that. And this is definitely one of them. The second element is just some radical acceptance that you may be putting yourself in harm's way. You may be turning the focus of the attacker onto you. Deciding ahead of time before you go to public events like this how much you are willing to risk and engaging in some acceptance that the preservation of our liberty may include the fact that the state will be violent toward us. And I want to make it really clear that we are not stepping in matching violence for violence. We are stepping in to de-escalate. There's no way you can completely eliminate the risk of bodily harm in these situations, but learning some de-escalation skills, those will go a long way toward protecting the bodies of yourself, the victim, and the perpetrator as well. You may not feel comfortable putting your body in harm's way, but that's fine. The first step is actually just to use your voice and to speak out and say, stop. This is not okay. This needs to stop. Enough people contributing their voices may be sufficient to stop the harm that is being done. You can and you should take out your phone and film and document what is happening. You may want to call the police, but if you can, ask the victim, do you want me to call the police? If you are physically unable to get involved, then grab some of the other bystanders, make eye contact with them and say, this person needs help, she needs help, step in, do something. I want to end with one last thing here. If you are the victim in this scenario, what can you do to break the bystander effect? The most important thing you can do is to point at people in the crowd, make eye contact with them and say, you help me. That absolutely breaks the bystander effect and lets that person know that they have a personal responsibility to step in and do something. If you know folks' names, call them by name. It is far more effective than just screaming help. So yeah, please read about the bystander effect. This is a psychological phenomenon that this regime will use against us, and we need to know how to circumvent it. Just learning about this phenomenon makes you more likely to overcome it in the moment. So make sure you share with other folks. Take a little time and read up on the bystander effect. I know that we want to help each other. We want to work together to defend democracy. And so we've got to understand how to add some tools to our toolbox to make us more effective. Learn how to take action, learn how to circumvent the bystander effect, and be one of the people who stands up in the moment and does the right thing.